Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we convene a 5-day program we're calling Compassion 2.0. What does compassion mean in a world full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity? I want to also note as we begin that today is Indigenous Day in the United States, a day when traditionally people have celebrated the arrival in Santo Domingo on October 12th, 1492 of Columbus, with a note of both historical magnitude but also deep sadness, because in the century following Columbus's landing in the Western Hemisphere, 90% of the indigenous people were extinct. And the indigenous that we witness and interact with today are literally survivors of one of the most massive and comprehensive genocides in the history of the world. It's estimated upwards of about 90 million people died as the Europeans laid waste to the New World as conquistadors of various kinds and impulses. It's also worth noting as we convene today that beginning on Saturday, just 2 days ago, there's been a major eruption in the Middle East, as you've all noted in the news, as Hamas, located and based in Gaza and representing the Palestinian aspirations for freedom, attacked Israel with a force and with an extent that was unprecedented in the entire modern history of the Middle East. There have been wars between Syria and Egypt and Jordan and Israel. But this was the first time that a indigenous group of fighters without a state, without an army, without access to infrastructure, took on the might of Israel in a way that was shocking to Israel and was shocking to the world. As I was reflecting on it, I think this is Israel's 9/11. You'll remember 9/11, out of the blue, Al-Qaeda, based in the Middle East, was able to attack the United States and with airplanes bring down the 2 World Trade Towers and also attack the Pentagon in an action that literally shocked the government of the United States and people around the world. So we're witnessing, everyone, as we convene a session on compassion, a 5-day program on compassion, a world that if you look in the news and you follow what's going on is as devoid of compassion as any time, certainly in our lifetimes. And we are, as a result of our lack of compassion with each other and lack of compassion with the larger ecosystem, the lack of harmony, the lack of empathy, the lack of any kind of kindness or tenderness in international and ecological affairs. We've brought the entire life process on planet Earth quite literally to the brink of extinction. What Israel will now do to the Palestinians is unimaginable. Just like what the United States then did to Afghanistan and Iraq was unimaginable. Trillions of dollars spent. Hundreds of thousands of people were killed and made homeless and wounded and displaced, by the millions displaced. For what? For what? And one of the deepest questions that come out of what's happening in the Middle East, and one of the deepest questions that come out of Indigenous Day, is that the trauma that we inflict over time, over the centuries to each other, accumulates in the psyche until the slightest triggering creates a convulsion of our beings to more violence and more trauma, till finally the world as we see it today is satiated with conflict and fear and anxiety and depression. So this is a serious issue that we're taking up this week about compassion. And what does compassion 2.0 really mean in our time? And as we begin each day, I'll be indicating some deeper layers that I've been reflecting on about what's going on in the Middle East and the general nature of trauma in our world as a foil and as a backdrop to this urgent imperative for, in some way, human beings at this time, when we want to react with violence, that we have to somehow transmute those feelings into loving kindness and compassion and empathy, because that's the only way for humanity to survive the present moment. So it's in this spirit I want to welcome my very good friend and colleague, Tom Eddington, who's a very successful business executive and coach and consultant. He also cares passionately about the environment, and he's the CEO of Endangered Global. And he also works very deeply in the whole field of nonviolence. If there's ever a time in human history where we need to lay down our arms, it is now. And so, Tom, thank you for this leadership once again in convening this program. And I turn the program over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Great to be here and really excited about the week ahead. I do want to just comment on a few of the things you shared, Jim, because I think it's important. You know, here at Humanity Rising really since inception, it's been about humanity rising and the code red issues that we're facing, whether it's climate change or what's been happening in the last year and a half in Ukraine, now in Israel, social injustice around the world. I mean, it's a finite list, but it's an extraordinary list of code red issues. And for me personally, both from a programming perspective on Humanity Rising, but also where I spend my time, it's trying to get to what's at the foundation, what is it that is the solution to addressing some of these code red issues. And I'm delighted this week to be working with longtime colleague Carson Kelly on Compassion 2.0 and the programming for this week, because as Carson and I have been in conversation over the last several years, it's clear to me that conscious leadership is at the foundation, and compassion is one of the most important solutions to addressing many of these code red issues. And just a little bit of background on Carson before we get started, and then he and I will frame the week for all of you. Carson's an entrepreneur with over 25 years of experience in technology startup management enterprise software sales, civic engagement, product development, positioning, business planning, and strategy. But he's more than that, as we all are as human beings. He's the founder of Compassion 2.0, Humanize Benevolently, and the Sustainable Development Goal Education Accelerator. He's a father. He's a resident of the Bay Area. He's a philosopher, and so much more that you'll have a chance to experience over the week. So, welcome, Carson. Let's frame the week for the audience.
Hi, Tom. Thank you. Very kind words. Yes, this week it's to Jim's point earlier about what's happening in Israel. The timing for this discussion becomes just ever more important. What we're here to do really this week is to take another look at what compassion can mean. There's been a historical perspective, some traditional thoughts about it, and I think that in today's world of scientific validation with some of the neuroscience that's been done on the study of compassion, behavioral science, et cetera, I think it's time to take another look. So this week, we're going to unpack this specifically around some of the scientific implications and current research that's going on, looking at compassion in the sense of the notion of common good. What does that look like? What does that mean? Looking at compassion and a way to scale it in the sense of organizational principles and cultural experience, looking at it in the sense of product, how people and consumers can experience something that might be considered a compassionate product, and looking at it from an environmental perspective in the sense of environmental action as an act of self-compassion. So we'll explore that. And then finally, looking at self-compassion, namely not just compassion for other, but compassion for self. So there's a lot that we have planned, and we have some just incredible people that have taken the time and willingness to join us this week. So I'm very excited about that.
Yeah, thank you, Carson. It's been fun organizing this week and pulling it all together. And over the course of the week, we'll help the audience understand the difference between sympathy and empathy and compassion. And we'll hear about compassion from a spiritual perspective, from a neuroscience perspective. And so it's been a terrific week of planning, and we're excited to get started. I'm looking. We've got Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati is joining us from Rishikesh. It's late there, and so we're going to start with Sadhvi. Hopefully, she is able to be with us. Obviously, with the distance, the time, and the technology, we may run into some complications, but the desire is to start with Sadhviji, and then following, and just a little bit of background about Sadhviji for those who don't know her. She's a spiritual leader, author, motivational speaker. She's based in Rishikesh, as I mentioned, in India. She is ordained in the Sacred Order of the Sanyas by her guru, and has been living in Rishikesh for about 25 years, and is the Secretary General of the Global Interfaith WASH Alliance, and is quite well known globally. Also joining us is Stephen Crane. Stephen is a graduate of Stanford University. He does work across disciplines, which makes his contribution to this conversation particularly interesting, covering things, areas of biology, psychology, behavior design, human nature, and the future of biotechnology. And also joining us today is Xuan Zhao. Xuan is a behavioral scientist at Stanford, co-founder of the Flourish Science, a science-based, mission-driven startup. She has 14 years experience in data science and empirical research with business training, and through her work is pioneering science-based and scalable solutions to help employees and students learn and practice well-being for more happiness, less burnout, stronger community, and better culture. So great to have everybody with us today. And I'm just looking, and it appears that we may have a technical problem with Sadhviji. So I'm going to suggest we go ahead and ask our other panelists to join us.
Hello.
Hey, Stephen.
Hi.
So let's start our conversation for both of you. What brought you to the area of study and the work that you're doing around compassion? How has your life's journey and path brought you to this conversation?
Xuan, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for the question. And for the nice introduction. So I have been studying social psychology since my Ph.D. So I did my Ph.D. at Brown. Initially, I was studying perspective taking, the idea that since we all see the world from different perspectives, how you can understand the world from a different person's view, and how you can, when you do that. So that's how I got started in my PhD. And then at some point I realized what I was studying is, say I sit across you, I sit across you at the dinner table, something is on your left, is on my right. That's too literal. So that's the point when I started getting interested in empathy, how we take other people's emotional perspective or social perspective. And then from there, I think I've been just getting into this world of how we connect with each other, how we do not connect with each other, and seeing all the missed opportunities. So I continued my research at Chicago Booth, where I studied receiving compliments and asking for help, and why we don't do these actions more often. And then starting at Stanford, really bringing this to a larger platform, collaborating with Nextdoor to study how we talk about different opinions in a public forum, or in online communities, and with Flourish, really trying to understand how we can bring happiness and well-being and the social connection to more people. That's the story. We have a microphone issue.
I wasn't sure if that was just me. Sometimes the ear pod microphones don't pick up that well. I'm not sure.
Yeah, let me switch. Thank you so much for letting me know. Let me switch. In the meantime, maybe you can go ahead. I'll fix my audio.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. Welcome, and hello to everybody who's watching. So I've been interested in human flourishing for quite a long time. Back when I was starting my undergraduate work at Stanford University, I realized it was a pretty special and unique opportunity to pursue what I really thought was most important and wanted to learn in life. And I figured, well, I might as well dig in on the topic of human flourishing, human well-being, and how we can achieve that. And if I can answer some of those questions for myself, surely I can eventually build up expertise to help others do the same thing. And that's what I've endeavored to do over the past 15 years or so since then. I realized early on also that key to that question of human flourishing was also the question of individual behavior change, and how we motivate ourselves to change, how we make things easy enough to help ourselves change. So those were interests that I carried with me for a long time through my undergraduate studies. And soon after graduating, I started studying with a major interdisciplinary project at Stanford called the Boundaries of Humanity. And in the context of that project, we spent many years researching and collaborating with the world's best experts on the topic of human nature. And along with that, we are considering the future of biotechnology and what it means to flourish as humans in the light of our understanding of what our nature is. And so that was informed by a diverse range of disciplines, everything from theology and psychology to AI and biotechnology, genetics, et cetera. And that gave me a deep understanding of human evolution and how humans came about, how our bodies and minds work. And I think understanding that context is pretty key to understanding what it is to flourish as a human. soon after that, I did my master's work in community health and prevention research. And in the context of that program, I took a course with one of the world's leading behavior design experts, BJ Fogg. And all my long-running interest in human behavior change really came to a head in that class. And I felt like I had found a system and an approach that was actually very practical, real world focused. It wasn't kind of abstract and academic and ivory tower. It was really about how to build things, how to put together products, put together services, et cetera, to help people change their behavior. So ever since then, I've been working closely with BJ on health and health and well-being related behavior change. And along the way of that master's program, I developed my interest in social connection as the direction, the aspect of human flourishing that I felt really spoke to me the most, that I felt was maybe the most underserved. Everybody, we are, sort of already knew about physical health and the things we're supposed to do for our sleep and our exercise and our diet and whatnot. But there really seemed to be a neglected, a sort of outsized neglect of human sociality and how important it is that we connect with each other as human beings. So since then, I've done a lot of work with social connection and helping people foster supportive, loving, caring, supportive relationships in their life. And lately, I've been doing that with a nonprofit initiative called Sunny. They're at gosunny.org, and I recommend checking them out and signing up for the things that we're putting out into the world as we continue to research and build tools to help people with social connection. And so that brings you pretty much up to present day and my long-running interest in human flourishing, social connection, and the important valences that has with compassion as well.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And I see that Sadhviji's been able to connect with us now. So let's quickly welcome her into our conversation. Sadhviji, could you, there we are.
So wonderful to be together. Sorry about that. We had a disconnection, and then luckily Tom was able to help us get back on even while being here with you all.
Welcome. It's great to have you with us. And I understand it's late there, so we'll take as much of your time as you're able to give us. And so we just quickly, I asked Stephen and Xuan to provide a little bit of background about compassion, and I'll just ask you to share a little bit about your journey and where compassion has been part of your life's journey.
A beautiful question. So my experience with compassion on a personal level has had so many different facets. It began, I think, on the deepest level, with self-compassion. When I came to India at the age of 25, I was not consciously seeking or searching anything. I was an academic. I was a scientist, and I was a good academic. I was doing very, very well in a Ph.D. program. I had graduated undergrad from Stanford and then was getting my Ph.D. in pediatric neuropsychology. And I had from the outside what you would look at and say, oh, this girl's got everything. She's got it all. Came from a family with a lot of privilege, a lot of opportunity, a lot of kind of the best that we're told in the West. Oh, this is what you need in order to be happy. And on many levels I was, but on a really deep level, I was really struggling and suffering. I had experienced many challenges and struggles and even trauma in my early childhood, and had struggled with addiction and depression and mental health struggles in my adolescence and early 20s. And when I came to India, And that too was just with a backpack on an adventure trip. It's not even something that I get to take credit for saying, oh, I was praying to God to, you know, show me the light or show me something deeper. It was just an adventure trip with a backpack on a semester off of my PhD program. And when I got here, I stood on the banks of the sacred Ganga River, a river I didn't even know was holy. And I had this extraordinary experience of being in the presence of the divine. And I had always felt throughout my life, like no matter what I accomplished or achieved or attained, that there was something deeply, meaningfully lacking in me. That on some very core level, I was not good enough or worthy enough or pure enough. And in that moment, I had this experience of the presence of the divine in everything and also in me. And it was the first time in my life that I actually felt not just that spiritual experience, but that awareness that, wow, that's not separate from me, but that is me. And then as the days and weeks and months and years went by, but especially in the beginning, it was really an extraordinarily beautiful process of compassion for the self, that which I was struggling with, that which I had experienced, that was all part of the story, the drama of this physical body, brain, mind, karmic package unfolding. But that actually who I am isn't the physical body, isn't the brain, isn't the fluctuations in it that, you know, we speak about as mind, wasn't my history, wasn't my trauma, wasn't my addiction, but actually is soul, spirit, consciousness, divinity. And that awareness, and then the self-compassion every time, because as we all know, as people who have had deep spiritual experiences, you have it and you still have to do your work. You have it and you also still have a human psyche and histories and patterns. And to be able to have compassion for this individual self, even after having had the experience of the divine self and the infinite self, was really a very, very powerful process of healing and of transformation. And then, of course, it enabled me to give compassion to others, because as we know, we can only give what we have. And until and unless I'm able to feel that love and compassion for myself, I can't really give it to others and share it with others. And then it became such a beautiful unfolding of compassion in action in terms of the actual projects that we were doing between schools and programs for women and all of these free service-oriented, charitable, humanitarian programs, healthcare and education and so much. But from a place of seeing the self in them, that from a spiritual, compassion-based place, it's not us as the ones who have a lot serving those who don't, or us as the humanitarians serving them, the needy, or we are the givers, they are the receivers, but rather us having the opportunity, the spiritual opportunity to touch a truth of ourself through that person, through that child, through that woman, through that sick person, through that tree, through that polluted river. And to really experience that flow of compassion of your pain is my pain. I'm not feeding you because I'm a humanitarian person and you're hungry. I'm feeding you because through my meditation, I'm experiencing or aiming to experience a oneness with you in which I realize and recognize that your hunger is my hunger. And so I feed you the same way I would feed myself. I'm going to care for you the same way I would care for myself. And that opportunity to dip into and drop into every minute and every moment, that experience of compassion has been really extraordinary. And now to be able to share it in the spiritual teachings and the satsang and the talks, and being able to really show up into a space with people with whatever it is that they're going through, and whether it's that what they need is a physical meal or a physical medical treatment through our work, or whether what they need is just understanding and love and guidance or wisdom or just presence. It's been such a beautiful, beautiful blessing. I don't know how long I'm supposed to talk, so I want to stop here and let you continue to take us through this beautiful conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you. It's wonderful having you here, and so appreciate your a little bit about the journey you've been on. Xuan, over to you. Just hopefully the technology, the speaker's working, your microphone's working, we can hear you now.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Wonderful. Wonderful. Wow, that's such a beautiful, powerful story. Thank you for sharing. Sadhvi, right? Is that how you pronounce your name? That's beautiful. Yeah, hard to follow with that. So yeah, my name is pronounced as Xuan. I came to the US to study psychology. So I grew up in China, arrived in 2011 to start my PhD at Brown University. So I think looking back, my entire journey, academic journey, has been understanding, seeing a bigger world from individual level all the way to institution and communities. So when I started, I was studying visual perspective taking. It's the idea that when I'm sitting across the table, something on your left is on my right. Very literal, the kind of perspective taking that's otherwise, it's still essential for us to survive in the physical world. Like you have to be able to tell if a car driver can see you and that, whether you should cross the road. When someone asks you to pass a pepper or salt, they tell you which one it is. All that kind of things that allow us to collaborate in the physical world. That's how I got started. When we take other people's perspective. I even had this talk, it's on YouTube, about whether we can take robots' perspective. When a number looks like a 9 and the robot sits across the table, whether we can tell it's a 6 from the robot's perspective. So that's how I got started. But then I got kind of like dissatisfied because apparently there are so many different perspectives in the world. It's not just about visual perspectives. So in my 4th year in my PhD, I was teaching a class on empathy and emotional perspective taking. I think that sets me down this path of understanding what is empathy, what is human connection, and how can we encourage people to develop more empathy, both for them in themselves and also empathy in our collective society. So after my PhD, I went to do a 3-year fellowship at Chicago Booth. So that's where I really worked with Nicholas Apley and Jane Risen, a few other amazing behavioral scientists to study social connection and the dynamics of social connection. Specifically, I looked at why we don't give other people compliments when we notice nice things in other people, and why we don't reach out to other people when we actually need help. So all these kind of seemingly puzzling behaviors of human psychology and the missed opportunities of connecting with each other. So that's after my 3-year PhD postdoc at Chicago Booth, I came to Stanford, and this time I saw an even larger world, from social interaction to seeing, understanding more about the communities and the institutions. So I collaborated with Nextdoor. So I work at Stanford Spark, which is a do tank. Instead of a think tank, we like to say that we partner with industry leaders and change makers to actually design and implement and measure sustainable, scalable changes. So at Spark, I learned tremendously from Hazel Marcus and Jennifer Eberhard. So both wonderful, wonderful teachers, professors at Stanford, especially what I really changed my view about understanding human behavior is Hazel Marcus, her culture cycles with Mariam Hamadani. So this is 4 eyes of cultures. So instead of thinking about cultures, East versus West, we think about it as from individual, how we think, to interpersonal, how we interact with each other, to institution, what kind of institutions and around us and how they shape our behaviors, all the way to idea and ideology. So it really helps me to start to think about the digital platforms, for example, as a kind of institution, or racism as a kind of ideology, and try to understand empathy and human connection on a larger scale. So some of the projects I conducted at Stanford involves working with Nextdoor to understand how we can help people better have civil, respectful conversations online. It's a huge challenge, but we've been making some really good progress there. And finally, I've also start to see how well-being, this is very much related to what Stephen mentioned, how well-being is also about social connection, and how the self-care industry, how meditation oftentimes we have well in those kind of traditional way of thinking about well-being, there is a small component of social connection, but social connection really is even more than just love, kindness, meditation, or like self-care and then empathy. It's like how we can build more social connections in our communities that allow us to practice well-being together, and sometimes even not just flourish together, but maybe even suffer together and struggle together. So that's the kind of work we have been developing at Flourish. So truly to understand how well-being could be defined in a more social and more communal way. That is my journey. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing a bit about your personal journey and how it is you got to where you are today. I'd like to expand our lens a little bit for this conversation. Post-COVID, we've heard a number of people talking about when do we get back to normal? How do we live in what I'll frame as these post-normal times? Because we are living in a new world, and I'll invite Carson in to just talk a bit more about the state of the world, the state of being, and why compassion is so important for the world today. Carson? Sure.
Thanks, Tom. As you and I have talked about in different occasions, it's an interesting time. The phrase post-normal times, which you brought up to me, I think is just so right on point. What it feels like to me is that compassion, that our point of reference, particularly post-COVID, has accelerated in the sense of the VUCA that's increasing in this world. And Jim mentioned this earlier in his introduction, but VUCA, for those that don't know, VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's often used as a description. It came from the, Special Forces operators who describe the environments that they operate within. And when I reflect on what's happening in this world, it feels like the VUCA in the world has gone up by a factor of 10. And it feels like the problems that we're looking at are actually starting to, not starting, but have really demonstrated clearly that they're almost beyond the ability of humans to actually manage, and particularly with our older modalities of thinking, right? In the sense of an extractive framework of how we view the environment and relationships and the economy and so forth. So again, when you just to put some of this VUCA concept into context, when we think about, say, the social divisions that have come up, and I'm really speaking more clearly or more focused on post-COVID, during COVID and after COVID, with all of the Black Lives Matter activities that came forward during that time. We have an incredible amount of economic division, economic imbalance in the sense of wealth continues to accumulate to a smaller number of people across the world. We have, of course, a pandemic that has hit us, which is not something that we had seen in a very, very long time. And as a reminder, even in the face of all of our technological advancement and so forth, that something can just completely lock the world down just very, very quickly. We have amazing changes that are happening in technology at a rate that's becoming both exhilarating and also very concerning, particularly with the advance of generative artificial intelligence. The rate with which that is increasing and is happening there's many stories, as I understand, of AI teaching itself things that its creators hadn't really yet told it to create. It's starting to learn and do things at some level. Now, I'm not an expert, but it's just anecdotally from what I'm hearing about. And then finally, of course, there's outside of just the normal, raging conflict, of which unfortunately we're now seeing again here in the Middle East, amongst also Ukraine and all throughout the world in different places. The environmental changes are really starting to show up, and they're making themselves known in the sense of really significant weather pattern changes. And, what humans are experiencing that they don't normally experience or haven't experienced up to this point. So, and you can riff on and on about these kinds of things, but taken all together, it feels pretty overwhelming. I know I feel pretty overwhelmed. And I know that when I've talked to colleagues who work with people in organizations, for instance, and what their take is in terms of seeing a broader number of people through their own professional work, the world is getting, I think, more intense than it has. And it feels like the problems are becoming beyond human scale. So I'll just kind of stop there for a moment, Tom, and get any of your reflections. I have some other thoughts I'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I wanted to bring Sadhviji back into this and just talk about the role that compassion plays and can play in helping us navigate this VUCA world. Or you'll have to unmute your device.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's so beautiful to be with you all, and it's so beautiful how you've brought in this topic, because I think compassion is in many ways the only thing that's going to help us navigate where we are and actually be able to save humanity here on earth. We talk about saving the earth, but the earth is going to be fine. The earth lived through the ice age and all of the other ages that have taken place. It's actually us, though, who are not going to be able to live unless we continue to have this very, very, very specific ratio of, oxygen to carbon to all of the different elements, this specific temperature. It's humans that we need to actually protect and save. And of course, the beautiful, lush variety and species of planet Earth, our sisters and brothers of different species. And to me, compassion is that which connects us. Compassion is all about connection. That's when we semantically distinguish it from pity or sympathy. It's that connection. Pity and sympathy are me over here, you over there. Compassion is us as one. And, in Sanskrit, we have these beautiful You can think of them as mool mantras or foundational mantras of Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that, or So Hum, I am that, meaning there's no distinction. There's no place I end and you begin. This separation is all an illusion between us as humans on the basis of race or religion or color or nation or sexual orientation or gender, or whatever ways we divide ourselves, or whether it's between me and the air, the water, the soil, the trees, the plants. And it's a practice of compassion that brings me back into connection. And that connection is the antidote, really, to all of that ails us. I mean, if you look at everything that's ailing us today, from the individual level of depression and anxiety and addiction, I mean, with tomorrow being Mental Health Awareness Day, and we're seeing the rates of this just skyrocket, to conflict that we're having between ourselves on all of these bases of race and religion and color, et cetera, to the conflict that we have with the earth. All of these conflicts are rooted in a myth of separation. I feel separate from the divine, from source, from spirit, from myself, so I suffer. I feel separate from you, so I suffer and I bring suffering to you. I feel separate from the earth, so I bring suffering unto the earth. And the only way we're going to come through this is diving deeply within ourselves to realize we're not separate. We are one. And in that oneness, as we stand up off of our meditation cushions, as we stand up off our yoga mats, and we carry that awareness into the world, not only does it heal our hearts, but it actually enables us then to be instruments, vehicles, vessels, tools of healing. You know, like Saint Francis of Assisi says, instruments of mercy, of grace, bringing light to darkness, and all of the places that we're struggling, compassion is the answer. So I really see it as the core. And I think the only other piece I wanted to add here is, you know, when we speak about yoga, the word yoga literally means union. We've kind of misunderstood it these days to think that it's about, you know, touching my toes or standing on my head. And those are great for your body. It's wonderful. But ultimately, the core of yoga is that brings us into compassion. It's a union of the self with the divine, and therefore a union of the self with all of the creation of the divine. And so it's the highest yoga. And lastly, actually, you had been mentioning, and the theme here is we also are talking about flourishing and human flourishing and our path to flourishing. To me, the way to know, to really be able to measure whether we're flourishing, you know, most of us, we measure it by the GDP or the number of possessions or how many items are on my shelf. But it's actually about the self, not about the shelf. And the way that I would measure flourishing is, how able are we to get up in the morning and drag ourselves out of bed without antidepressant medicine? How able are we to lie down and go to sleep at night without anxiety medicine or sleeping pills? How many places in the world do people have access to clean water, clean air, clean soil without having to buy the water in a bottle? How much are we able to give of ourselves to help others rather than grabbing and grasping? You know, the hallmarks of illness is that yearning to just grab and grasp and hoard and hold. And I would say the hallmarks of flourishing, of wellness, is that urge to share, that awareness that my cup runneth over. And so compassion, of course, again, for that is core and key, because it's reuniting us and reconnecting us. So I'm so deeply touched to be able to be with you all here today and to rise together as one not separate humanity, but even also as one not separate Earth family. You know, just in closing, as I say that, I realize we've got a beautiful, beautiful teaching that says Vasudev Kutumbakam. And it was actually the theme of the G20 that just took place in India. And it's translated as the world is a family, the world is one family. But quite literally in Sanskrit, it means Vasudha, the Mother Earth, the Mother Goddess. We are her family. So we're not just one amorphous, random general family, but we are actually the family of Vasudha, the goddess of the earth. So for me, just holding that awareness, that remembrance in every minute and moment is the way to keep begin to try to live each moment in that compassion.
Thank you, Sadhviji. And thank you for being with us. I don't know if you're able to stay a bit longer or not, but we'll honor you and the team in India and Rishikesh needs to tend to yourselves. So
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, and thank you for being with us. Carson, I'm just wondering if there's any more that we want to do to bridge and frame the VUCA world that we're living in, and the role that compassion plays or can play in helping all of us as humanity navigate this world, and then invite our guests to engage in that conversation.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Tom, for the opportunity. I think what I would like to add at this point is that, well, just anecdotally, in terms of compassion 1.0 versus 2.0, I'd like to just take a minute and speak to that. I think when you think about compassion, historically, one tends to think about it as an individual virtue. And typically, individually, this virtue has been taught through, as far as I can tell, basically every philosophical and or spiritual or religious system that we have. I don't think there's any really that doesn't speak to the need to be kind and good and helpful to others and alleviate their suffering. And so historically, compassion, in my mind at least, has been thought of as this individual virtue that comes from a non-secular framework taught by typically a teacher of some sort. And I think what we're starting to see now is that there's an additional framing of kind of an emergence within the zeitgeist, in the sense that compassion is moving from a non-secular to a secular framework. And it's moving from an individual virtue, not moving from, but becoming in addition to an individual virtue to a group or organizational principles. I had the opportunity to start to notice this particularly several years ago, actually. Had a chance to attend a conference put on by a fellow named Scott Shute, who at the time was the director of mindfulness and compassion programs at LinkedIn. And he, amongst others, they're starting to demonstrate, the companies are starting to demonstrate through titling and through creating positions within their organizations, people to space hold compassionate and or mindfulness and or well-being kinds of frames within the organization. And then COVID comes along, of course, and exasperates an already growing problem of loneliness and depression and so forth. That's happening amongst people, particularly in the, as I understand it, in the Western worlds. With that, there's been a greater demand to have people bring in, or companies rather, provide more tools and frames and so forth to be able to help them. So during this conference, like I said, with Scott Shute, there was a lot of discussion about how to bring compassion and or mindfulness and mental well-being in terms of leadership as well as in organizational principles. And I think, again, it speaks larger to this notion that there's a move, as I can see it, there's a move towards the need to be together, to be connected, like what Sadhvi was speaking to earlier about this resurgent notion of our fundamental interconnectedness. You know, Tom, you and I were having a discussion about this at one point. We think both brought up the fact that according to some Buddhist traditions, the next Buddha will not come in the form of an individual, but it'll come in the form of a community. And this is, as in those traditions say, is the Maitreya Buddha, or as I understand it, the Buddha of love. So there's this notion, at least in that metaphor, and I think it's playing itself out in other places, that the modality moving forward is not these former patriarchal extractive frames that have brought us to where we are today. In a sense, there's lots of beauty and there's lots of wisdom still to be found in some of those traditions, but at the same time, we've arrived at a place where our previous thinking and our previous way of being in the world will not serve us moving forward. In order to solve for some of these larger, very difficult things that are in front of us around technologies and pandemics and a world that's getting much smaller, and our actions, you know, at one place will just continue to reverberate and impact others very, very easily and clearly, we necessarily need to bind ourselves together in, I think, a new way, which is around the interconnectedness and the recognition of our own, I don't want to, divinity, our own spiritual source, whatever your metaphor might be, that who we are is ultimately connected through communities of love. And at the basis, I think this is this notion of moving from empathy into actual compassion and having a frame of a compassionate orientation towards others. Because if we don't, we're not going to be able to solve for a lot of these problems. So it's within that perspective of looking at, again, moving from compassion as a thought from non-secular framework and now adding a secular framework, namely looking at the scientific validation of work that's being done. And there's so many pioneers in this work. I had the opportunity to work with Professor Dr. Tanya Singer in a company called Humanize, and she's done some amazing research. Richie Davidson has done incredible research. And there are many other researchers out there that I don't know, but just looking at the trend, I think it's important that we ground ourselves in the scientific basis and understanding of how pro-social behavior, what I would call compassionate behavior, is, I think, the basis for us moving forward. So to that end, we have two incredibly brilliant people as part of our panelists, both Stephen Michael Crane and Xuan. So I think it would be great to bring them in and hear their work, if you're okay with that, Tom.
Yeah, that's great. Stephen, do you want to, I know you've got some slides and some content you'd like to help move this conversation even deeper and richer.
Sure. You know, I might as well put a few data pieces into our conversation, because I know we sort of have these subjective feelings and we have our stories of what's happening around the world. And as a scientist, I'm always curious, like, you know, what are our best measures to understand whether, you know, that's in our heads, is it true? Who's represented in that data? So I'll just share three quick pieces about social connection and that dimension of flourishing that's so central to compassion. I think trying to tie those two together, if we don't have those relationships and we don't have that opportunity to practice and build the skills of compassion, which are necessarily require encounters with others and relationships with others, where we have the chance to build that love, to build that opportunity for self-sacrifice, which I think is really at the core of human flourishing across the lifespan. If I had to boil it down to, you know, one central idea, it would be love and self-sacrifice and willing to give to others. These are just, I'm going to show three brief slides making the point that we are considerably more disconnected than we have been in the past. So what you see here is a survey of how many people who say they have a certain number of close friends. And the main thing to notice is right along the top. In 1990, 3% of people said they had no close friends. In 2021, 12% of people, a fourfold increase, said they had no close friends. And you can notice that the small numbers here, none, one, or two, all of those have gone up. And while the higher numbers of 5, 6, 7, they have all gone down. So that's one measure, is just how many people does everybody say they have as friends? This one, loneliness in adolescence in particular, is, I think, is particularly concerning. This data shows here, this is a survey of, it's quite a lot. It's over 1 million people represented in here, measuring loneliness in adolescence. And in particular, I'd look at these last 3 data points here, 2012, 2015, 2018, where loneliness in 2012 was around 17% in adolescents, and in 2018 is around 30%. We don't have data that's collected in the same way that's more recent, but I would imagine it's probably only higher than that. So these are really important for adolescent mental health and well-being, and just their opportunity to show up and experience that important dimension of our flourishing, which is social connection. The last one, this shows data, and this is only between 2009 and 2019. They haven't released updated figures for this yet, as far as I know, but this shows over our lifespan, how much time we spend with other people. There's a lot going on in this chart, but the main thing that I would notice here is the time spent alone, especially, let's see, after age 40, you know, it just goes way, way up in relation to other people. And I think the numbers, again, 2020 and beyond, would have even higher proportions of time spent alone. So those are 3 ways of looking at what's happening in society broadly. I think this is all US-based data, except the adolescent one has some international representation too. But these 3 figures show that disconnection is more and more widespread, and it's a big issue too, not just for its own sake, but because of how much social connection and loneliness is implicated in our health and well-being. It has serious impacts on our stress, our physiology, and health outcomes such as depression, even heart disease, diabetes, etc. It has implications for our well-being as employees and as workers in the economy. People who are disconnected are much more likely to leave their jobs, to have lower performance, to need stress-related sick days, time off. And so because of those things, I just wanted to put a little bit of data out there and see if anybody wants to go with that, or feel free to take us in a new direction, Tom.
Yeah, well, thank you for the additional data, Stephen. It just provides some, I mean, not that we didn't already, anybody who's awake in the world didn't already know that the data at not at the precise level, but just had a sense that we've got a problem. But it provides additional context. So Xuan, if you'd like to join us and just share a bit more about how do we use compassion as a bridge to navigate where humanity can go from where we are, and make sense of the challenges we're faced with as a species.
Yeah. Very, very powerful data, Stephen. I've always troubled to see some of the data. I think one thing we can recognize, and we are having a side conversation in the chat, is that to recognize the impact of our own actions and on our well-being and other people's well-being. Really, I've done some research on giving compliments. I would just use that as an example, or recognizing the praiseworthy qualities and actions in other people. So when I was at Chicago, we conducted several different experiments where we recruited pairs of friends or family members, and we randomly assigned one person to give compliments to another person. And then we measured their expectation on how the other person would feel, and then show the compliments to the recipient and actually ask them how they actually felt. And we found that overall, people tend to underestimate how happy the recipient of the compliments feel. That's my research with Nicholas Apley. We we wrote up a paper, talked about how, actually 2 papers about how we tend to underestimate the kind of positive impact we have with our small words, and the reasons, because we oftentimes think about it's the action, like we have, it's the words, we have to find ways to articulate our thoughts, and you have to be competent in delivering your thoughts. But truly, what matters to the recipient is the warmth and the kindness that's conveyed in the action, and exactly what word you choose, that comes second. But when we are in a position to help, to offer kindness, to offer compassion, we might often get tripped over or even stopped because we are not exactly sure whether the action we want to take is the best action. I mean, certainly you can ask, but the thing is, don't let that kind of a fear that you are not doing the exactly perfect thing, saying the perfect word, stop you from reaching out and offering help and creating a moment of connection. And I believe that once people are connected, then there is much more potential for us to develop compassion and to make something beautiful out of the compassion. So I think that's our research. But Nick and I always have this hypothesis, we never got to test it in the lab, that we not only underestimate our positive impact on other people, but also we might underestimate the negative impact of our harmful behaviors, like harsh words, for example, on social media. You see this even more often when we are really nasty with each other, and we may not even realize that how hurtful it is when someone, even a stranger, says something about you that kind of like negates your existence. So that's the kind of research we couldn't do for obvious reasons. It's IRB, for research we need to get IRB approval. That one is really hard to get people to curse each other and to humiliate each other. That we never want to do that kind of experiment, but that stays as a hypothesis. So the point, the takeaway is that oftentimes we do not recognize the impact our both positive actions and negative actions have on other people. And that could be one of the factors that we are not compassionate enough with each other. Because, it's easy to, because you are in your own shoes, and it's really hard to understand exactly how other people feel.
Stephen, any reflections on that?
No, it's great. I love Xuan's work. I'm very inspired by it, and I love the careful experimental approach that exposes those biases that we have that hold us back from connecting. And it's just so ironic that we hold in our heads a mindset that's counter to our own flourishing, but we don't recognize it. And so I really, encourage people to think about that next time they're approaching social situations, of talking to people, giving compliments, etc. Because Xuan's work really emphasizes how we just have the wrong idea about how those interactions are going to go typically, and to use that as an opportunity to lean into the opportunity for connection with other people.
Carson, you're any further thoughts on that?
No, and I mean, not much else to be said. I mean, I'm a big time fan of both Xuan and Stephen. I mean, their work is amazing. I would be curious to hear more, starting with Stephen and then move to Xuan, about how do we go forward in the sense of how do we make this tangible, right? Both of you are working on amazing applications. Stephen has a variety of different things, as I understand it, that he's working on, one of which, as he mentioned, is Sunny. And Xuan is doing an incredible project or application platform called Flourish, and Flourish Science is the name of the company. So there's two very tangible frames that are being put forward that bring together a scientifically validated approach to creating a compassionate experience for humans. So Stephen, any thoughts about the things you're working on, what you're most excited about? Just open floor.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking about how important it is that we take our connection to each other seriously in the same way that we take our health, our fitness seriously, our well-being. It demands the same level of attention and focus and really deliberate behavior change. And it didn't used to be that way in our environment of human evolution. As we evolved as a species, our social needs were much more easily met in the context of the people who we saw every day, the bonds we had with them, the interdependence that we felt with everybody else, because we truly were deeply interdependent as a deeply social species who, our main evolutionary advantage was that we could cooperate, and we could cooperate flexibly in large numbers. And that context easily, fulfilled basically everything we needed to flourish. We got our activity, and we got our nutrition, and we got our social connection in ways that worked well for our nature, for our body, our biology, and our psychology. The modern environment, our cultural evolution has accelerated so much more rapidly than our genetic evolution that who we are biologically, genetically, has not caught up to where we're at in terms of our cultural evolution. And we've obviously created these environments where there's larger and larger mismatches between what's good for us and our flourishing and how we've actually evolved to flourish. So, like I said, our exercise, our diet, we recognize that we're in an environment where we need to adopt deliberate behavior change in order to take care of those aspects of our nature and to flourish. And I would suggest we need to do the same thing with our social connection. Our modern environment is not by default providing what we need in order to flourish as humans and to connect with others. And so we need to take it upon ourselves to engage with things like Sunny. So again, it's at gosunny.org, and you can check out what we're building and sign up for our list. And our approach there is to combine the best things in behavior science and behavior change and the science of social connection. So we're trying to help people engage in those steps, do the things that they already want to do, which is to reach out and stay better connected to the people in our lives, to be supportive, and to build a network of people who can support us in times of need as well. And so we're trying to break those outcomes down into simple steps, simple approaches, things that are easy enough to do, that even if you are having a rough day, even if your motivation is quite low, there are simple things that you can still do. And Sunny is there for you as your coach, as your friend, to help you engage in those things that you want to be doing. So that's one approach that I'm taking. And I also teach courses at Stanford to undergraduate and graduate students on the social health concept and how to engage in those behaviors. So that's another approach that I'm taking on that. And Xuan, I'd be happy to hear about yours too.
Before we hear from Xuan, I just wanted to respond to what you said, because it reminded me of an anecdote. Again, coming back to Scott Shute, he was telling a story in a book that he's written, that he went home to visit his family and went into a thrift store and found some old Life magazines in the year that he was born, and was just kind of flipping through them just, for fun. And it was interesting because apparently in the Life magazine, they were outlining how people were doing these crazy things with their bodies. Like people would run for no reason, and run around tracks and, lifting heavy things. And, and there was this whole notion that he observed, and I'm not sure if I explained the story correctly, but basically it was this idea that the birth of exercise, not science per se, but the willingness to physically train, to strengthen the body and to improve its performance for its own sake, was something that was relatively new, and he happened to see it, in the Life magazine. And his larger point, and one that I'm hearing you say too, and I think in context of COVID, because COVID allowed people the ability to finally come forward and say, I'm not doing well, particularly in an organizational context, right? This is a big deal. Up to this point, people typically, therapy and so forth is always, not always, it's a very wonderful practice. I've personally gotten a lot of benefit out of it for myself, but it hasn't historically been something that has been readily accepted in some way. And to talk about mental and emotional challenges that one is facing, particularly in a work environment with, your employer, is also something that hasn't been happening, but that's changed, right? And so kind of like the notion of exercising in the sense, I think we're now at this place where we need to, of course, socially exercise or socially develop, or not in the sense of being able to be, funny at a party per se, but just to lean into these pro-social relationships that basically our neurobiological evolution has said, hey, you need to do this because, evolutionarily, to your earlier point, as a group, you're going to be successful. So participate in the group and you'll be, have that way to live and thrive and survive. And I think, again, now that we're seeing all of the work like both of you are doing in your own way, plus a lot of work that the neuroscientists are doing and other scientists are doing, I think we can give ourselves explicit permission to allow ourselves to feel good and feel better and to be kind and good to other people. And that's not a weakness, which is also a part of the current vernacular, which is just absurd because it takes incredible, great strength to be able to come from a place of being kind and compassionate and good to not only another, but to oneself. So anyway, I just wanted to add that perspective because I think Scott Schute's story was very apropos, but also to your point, Xuan, tell us about what, some of what you're more about the app and just kind of the vision that you see and what you're excited about.
Yeah, totally. We often think about it as not just an app, it's a movement that we are hoping to plant. So I think about coming back to the idea of from individual all the way to ideology. Really, we think about it not just changing people's cognition about recognizing the power of your small actions and actually doing these small actions. We also think about is the community and the organization, how we can really strengthen the connective tissues that used to be in our organizations and we might have, or local communities that we might have lost during the pandemic or recently because of technology. So that's why we've been developing our program and call it Flourishing Together. So the together part is what we really want to emphasize, really bringing more attention, awareness to how we can flourish by building these connective tissues, engaging in more deeper, meaningful conversations, and really to take care of each other, asking those questions, how are you doing really? And to reflect on well-being practices and share well-being practices with each other, really creating this kind of time and space for us to connect. So that's what we've been working on a lot at Flourish, from individual action all the way to building organizational cultures. So I'm sharing our link here, and we really hope that we are bringing this kind of awareness to more people. That's why we are working with several universities and companies this fall and /winter to bring Flourish to more students, more employees, and really help people start rethinking of well-being as community well-being and organizational well-being.
Well, thank you both for being with us this program and helping us kick off the week on Compassion 2.0. I'd like to invite Jim back into the conversation as we wrap up today's session.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson, Stephen, Xuan. Marvelous session and start for our 5-day program. Thank you. I want to take up the point, Carson, that you were making a few minutes ago and underscore it, because I think you've made a seminal observation based on the gentleman who flipped back in the old magazine to the time he was born. I recently saw on Netflix a series called The Blue Zone, and it's about places around the world that live to an extraordinarily old age. And the one thing that they have in common is that they exercise in the course of the day very naturally in different ways as they, cook, or they climb up stairs, or they go fishing, and they're sort of in perpetual motion during the day, and they don't do any formal exercise, or anything like that, but they just ambulate in different ways, and if you think about our world, increasingly industrialized, increasingly sedentary, increasingly isolated. You first have this phenomenon back, really in the 60s, 70s, of this surge of the need for exercising because we weren't getting it through our natural lifestyles anymore. And then here you have Stephen and Xuan's app coming out, so that we're at this moment where, like exercise 50 years ago, social well-being and interaction is now something that has to be consciously cultivated, because that was another aspect of these communities that lived to an exceedingly long time. Not only did they get natural exercise, but they were also always in some kind of a communal environment just naturally in their lives, so that they didn't have to go to the gym. They didn't have to sign up for some social club, but that's not our world. So first it was exercise, now it's social interactivity that needs to become a conscious part of our daily intention. And I think that's an important point, all of you, that has emerged out of this first session, because it feels seminal to me in terms of understanding sort of the novelty of how you create compassion right now, but also the urgent necessity of all of us humans living in modernity to be very conscious, choice by choice, of having to create consciously our world in a way that our grandparents never even had to think about, because they were doing it naturally. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out for everyone's comment, because I think it's a really important point that you all have made.
Yeah, to some extent, it's sad that we have to think about this intentionally now, because otherwise, bodies, we do not connect, and we all get in our own silo. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actively work to fight against this.
Yeah. And and another point that's just occurring to me is part of the challenge is that we all have to be living much more consciously, because we are deprived, because of our social structure, from the natural rhythms out of which the species emerged. So the question of consciousness now is a critical aspect of self-care and care for others, because we're no longer in a world where unconscious processes suffice to generate well-being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it requires this whole new level of metacognition, of monitoring, of where you have to be attentive to your body, how it's feeling. And even with all of that, you also need education. You need to understand the mismatch between our environment and our nature. You have to understand who we are, how we evolved, and how to get those things that we really need, even in our modern context, where many of them require this deliberate action to achieve them.
Yeah, well put. Well put. And in our world, you do that through an app.
It's one way.
No, that's I don't think you should do it through an app. We often think about it as a reminder to actually go out and live them.
Of course.
Just a reminder, nevertheless. But and also I see comment about singing and dancing and these ancient practices.
Yeah.
really powerful when we are in a crowd. And that's why people go to concerts, go
Yeah.
to sport events when you feel around other people. You
Yeah.
get emotional synchrony and even physiological synchrony from these kind of actions. I have to admit, I haven't been in a collective space for too long. I'm going to find an event close to me and actually attend it and feel that kind of vitality. This is a good reminder. I need more of this.
Great. Well, that is getting close to our time. So Carson, do you want to make any final comments, and then you, Tom, and then you can tee us up for tomorrow?
No, I say no, and then I start to comment. The comments I would add would be just to thank Stephen and Xuan for being here with us and for your work. I personally am so excited about what's happening with younger people who are exploring these technologies and looking at this additional human expression of both of scientific inquiry combined with a technological expression to be able to somehow get us back to our greater sense of humanity, right? So it's kind of a conundrum at one level, but it's also brilliant. And so anyway, so thank you both for being here, and and continue to be excited about working with you and watching what it is that you're going to continue to do. Jim, I would also say thank you so much for the opportunity, and Tom as well, for us to be able to explore these things for this week. Sure. I really just think that the time is to look at this notion of compassion, to embrace it. The compassion 2.0, people give me a hard time because, I live in the world of technology and I'm in Silicon Valley area, and, it's just really nerdy. But I think there is something there to call forward people to be able to not just think about compassion as a traditional frame in the West, at least, of pity or taking some sort of charity, but that compassion is a pro-social frame that's measurable in our brains and our neurobiology, and there's implications of that, and there's a way to lean into that really seriously to advance ourselves through this suffering, this huge frame of suffering that we've created that continues to flare up, like we mentioned earlier, in Israel. So anyway, I think this is incredibly important, and I again appreciate the opportunity to be able to explore that. And I know, Tom, you'll probably have several things to add, but in terms of tomorrow, we're going to be meeting with Jennifer Nadel, who's done some incredible work in Great Britain around the common good and compassion in politics very explicitly. And we will also be talking with Jim Doty, who is a neurosurgeon at the Stanford Medical School, but he also set up the Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education at the Stanford Medical School. He did that with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Jim and his friend Marianne Williamson will also be coming on into a dialogue around the notion of the common good, which is something that doesn't seem to be with us anymore at some level. And again, something we need to bring forward. So that's what's happening for tomorrow. And then a bunch of other, what I think in a nerdy way, great things for the rest of the week. So thank you. So Tom, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Carson, for teeing up tomorrow. This exploration we're doing this week, it's really to help understand and dispel a lot of misunderstandings about compassion, but more importantly, to really help us appreciate and see that compassion truly is a foundational component of navigating the world that we're living in. And so just excited to be presenting it this week, having folks with us and continuing the conversation tomorrow. So we'll look forward to being with you all tomorrow to go deeper into compassion, politics, and the common good.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Carson and Xuan and Steve. That'll bring us to a close for today, everyone. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You also received it in your Zoom reminder of the session for today. And then tomorrow, we'll engage in the second of 5 programs on Compassion 2.0. If there's an issue that needs to be addressed in our world today, it's compassion. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.